Good evening, United Baptists. The thoughts on everybody's mind today, of course, is the transition from President Trump to President Biden. And it's something that I think probably many people tuned in today to see. It's definitely been something that lots of people have been talking about. And whenever there's big moments like this in our country, as a pastor, I always want to be an encouragement because I think it's very easy for us to get focused and respond just how the world responds to these things. And it's really important for me that we always have a Christian worldview of what's going on. Because, as Christians, our home ultimately is in heaven. We're citizens of heaven. And so how we approach things like elections and the changing of power in a country is, I think, very important. And not only that, how we approach that and how we respond is a testimony. It points to God or it points away from God. And so I want to give you a few thoughts that I think, regardless of anybody's political background, should be able to agree if you're a Christian and you want to follow God's Word. We've been doing a series on Sunday evenings going through 1 Peter. 1 Peter is a very powerful book. It speaks to really two truths, to hope and also to suffering. Really, the book was written to give hope to Christians that were in a very difficult moment. And so my series has been called Hope for Today. And I've really enjoyed being able to have discussions about what the passage has to say. Now, in this book, there's a few verses that speak to a Christian's view towards government. And you have to understand that back then, they didn't get a choice in any way, shape, or form about who was going to be their leaders. The dictators ruled by might. And if you wanted to go up against them, you would be paying with your life. And I think that's one reason why we have some tension here in America today as Christians. We get to vote, and that's really a privilege that very few people have ever had in American history. It's always been a matter of who was the most powerful, was the one who ruled over others. And we live within this unique time where we're able to participate in choosing who our leaders will be. Now, because of that, I think that brings some very unique issues that Christians have to think through so that they approach government in a godly way. And there's a lot of passages in the New Testament that talk about how a Christian is to view their leaders. But we're just going to focus in on these few verses in 1 Peter. And I want to make a few points just to kind of help you as you're processing through this. Because, every time there's a change, especially when there's a change from one political party to another, that's a real moment for Christians to show where their hope is and also to show the grace of God. And so I'm hoping that that'll be the case. I just want to say, everybody in America has real concerns about what's going on in America. Real concerns. And have had those concerns for a long time. But I want to let you in on a little secret. Jesus said that in this world you will have tribulations, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. We will always have really great concerns, things that are on our hearts that we have to pray about. But that doesn't mean we don't act like a Christian towards our leaders. So I'm going to read a few verses, and then we'll leave it at that. 1 Peter chapter number 2, verse number 11. Peter here is going to make a point that I think is very important for Christians. He's going to be talking about the mindset we're to have. He says, "Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers." Now that word strangers is really, it's a more technical term like aliens. You're in a country that you don't belong to. So here he says, Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lust which war against the soul. A big point in Peter is that we are pilgrims on this earth. This is not our home. Our citizenship is not on this earth. It's in heaven. And so we need to live as people that are passing through. Don't get caught up with the things that the world cares about. Don't get angry about the things that the world is consumed with. Focus on what matters. Focus on where our home is. Then it goes on to say, And here's the reason: having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. So here he says, one of the reasons it's so important to keep your eyes on heaven is you want to have a good testimony to those that are unsaved. It's so important. People look and they watch. They want to. They can tell if Christians are the same as them, if they care about the same things that they do, or if Christians, and we're talking about disciples here, if they're living for what's to come, if they make decisions based on heaven and not based on this earth. Loving your enemies, forgiving, showing mercy. These are all decisions you make based on heaven, not in the here and now. Now here, he's building up to this point, and now he's going to talk about how Christians deal with their government leaders. Here's what he says: submit yourselves to every ordinance of men for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For it is the will of God that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. I'm going to talk a little bit, there's a few other verses there, but immediately there's a few points here. First of all, he talks about that the viewpoint a Christian is to have to government is one of submission. Now, that is a word that almost nobody appreciates. And I mean, how could you? Our flesh wants to be in charge. And so to submit means to say, you know what, I don't agree with what you're saying. I don't think it's the best thing, but because you have authority, I will go cheerfully along with you, and I will follow that. So that includes, paying our taxes, building codes, these kind of things. These are opportunities to submit. And the Bible here says we're to submit ourselves to our government leaders. And the reason there it says is for the Lord's sake. We also find there that it's ultimately God who sets up governments, who sets up kings, and who tears them down. Before the election, I preached a sermon, and one of the points in there was, I am not pulling my hair out for what's going to happen because I believe in the providence of God. I do. How God works in the affairs of nations is far beyond my scope. It's far beyond my ability to know why this decision does and what is going to be the impact of that decision 50 to 100 years down the line. I don't know that. That is God's pay grade, not mine. And so regardless of what's happening, the Bible's very clear. It says God is the one that sets up kings and God's the one that takes them down. So why does he do these things? I don't know. But I believe by faith that he is doing that. And so because of that, when we are unkind towards our government leaders, when we slander them, and when we are not respectful, what we're really saying is, God, I don't think you know what you're doing. It is a matter of faith. I agree. There are things that all the time that our government leaders do or act that we say, this is wrong, this is bad for the country, this is bad for people. But the Christians in the New Testament times were living under a dictator that was killing Christians. And yet it's told here to submit to them. Now he also says for the Lord's sake. And that's always very important. The ultimate authority is God. And so if our government is telling us to do something that's in a violation to what God has clearly said, well, then we obey God rather than man. But most of the things I see people get up in arms about are not things that the Bible specifically says. They're things that they don't want to submit to. And I know submission isn't easy, but as Christians we're called to do that because we're called to be a good testimony. The idea in the Bible is that Christians are focused on winning people to Christ, focused on bringing love to their neighbor, and that's what they're known for. They're not known for railing against their government. They're not known for trying to tear down government leaders. And I just want to say, if you can show me something different in the Bible, how a Christian is to approach their government, I'd love to hear it. But there is passage after passage from Christ to Paul to Peter that speak that Christians are to be focused on the kingdom of heaven and obeying our earthly authorities, as long as it's not telling us to do something that God does not want us to do. So we need to have that attitude. But there's another one that's really important, and I think sometimes we lose focus on this. In verse number 17, it says, honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. The word honor there is to speak well of. Honor is you lift someone up. You look at their good things. You bring the good things in front of them. And it says here specifically to honor the king. A lot of times people, they'll say, well, I'm praying for my president. I'm praying for my governor. But, they're kind of praying that God would remove them from office, right? Get rid of them. That's not honoring. We should always pray for God's will. But we should be praying that they would follow, God's wisdom and also have discernment for the decisions they have to make, that they would pursue policies that bring peace and justice and safety, to our country. There's a lot of things we can pray for them about, but one of the things it says is honor. And because we live in a country that has freedom of speech, people say whatever they want. They make whatever jokes they want. They spread whatever gossip that they hear. Whether they know that's true or not, they'll just spread it. And that is not honoring the king. And if you're a Christian, it doesn't matter if you voted for the person or not. You're called to be a testimony. And how you speak about your leaders, our leaders, is a testament to your faith in God. And I believe that. I jokingly, when I was talking a little bit with our church Sunday evening, I jokingly said, how shocked would your friends be if you said something honorable about President Biden if you didn't vote for him, or President Trump if you didn't vote for him? How shocked would people be if you honored them on your social media, And I think people couldn't even imagine doing something like using their social media to honor whoever the president is, whoever the governor is. Look, we never will agree with everything, and there'll be things that we very much disagree with. And we can spell out why we think this policy is wrong, but if we are doing this without showing honor and respect, and I'm not just talking to the office, I'm talking to the fact that God has them in that position, then we're sinning. And we're also showing the world that we really don't trust that God is in control. And let me leave you with this point. I think a lot of reasons why we have issues with how we approach our leaders is because we do live in a democracy, we get to vote, and we have this idea that our leaders are accountable to us. We get to vote them in, we can vote them out. And that is a very worldly way to look at it. Because when you read the Bible, you find that actually we're to submit to our leaders. Here's who really our leaders are accountable to. They're accountable to God. And that is a far more serious and sobering thought than being accountable to me. They're accountable to God for how they're leading the nation. They're accountable to God with what they're doing to our country, how they're leading us. And that's a far greater thing. And so because of that, I can confidently say, you know what, I am praying that for the very best for every one of our leaders in our city, our state, and our country. I'm praying that they will have great wisdom, great discernment, that they'll make good decisions. And I always want to honor them because I believe 100% that beyond my ability, God's in control. And so God can work in any situation, and I'm going to trust Him. And I hope you will too. So I hope this has been an encouragement and a challenge. It is a challenge to live in America today and have a Christian attitude to government. I understand it's very difficult because the world wants to be angry all the time. And there's always going to be things concerning that break our hearts that's going on in the country. We should pray about that, but we shouldn't allow that to steal our joy and our hope, because our hope is not here. Our hope is in heaven. Thank you so much for tuning in. God bless.